Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a review for you of this little guy right here. This is the Sandrin Knives Torino. First off though, in the name of full disclosure, I want to thank Sandrin Knives very much for sending one of these guys my way. They reached out to me, said, hey Nick, we got a Torino, you want to check it out? I said, sure, why not? They sent it along. Nonetheless, we have to assume this is the very, very best quality controlled one of these guys ever, and I'm doing my best not to let that affect the nature of my review. And of course, I told them I'm going to talk about the good, the great, the bad, the ugly. Might be a gem, might be junk. See, I did it out of order that time. But anyways, that's what we got going on here. Full disclosure. Next thing, let's do some size comparison. Here this guy is against the Spyderco Delica. And so what we see here is in terms of sharpened blade length, this is actually a little shorter than the Delica, even though in terms of actual, measured blade length, they're about identical. Here it is against the Ontario Rat number 2. So again, relatively short blade length for a relatively longer blade. And then here it is against the Spyderco PM2. And so what we see here is this is a relatively short little knife here. Then actually two other comparisons I'd like to do for you. First off, this is the Sandrin Knives Delatore, which is actually from my personal collection, one of my very, very favorites from them. Actually, my favorite knife from them by far. And then here it is against the Sandrin Knives TCK version 1, the TCK 1.0. So anyways, there you go. Next thing, what the heck is any of this? Who is Sandrin's? The Sandrin Knives is a company, they're based out of Italy, but they've got U.S. distributorship. But they are a company that is dedicated to one sort of idea, and that is this particular flavor of blade. This is not steel at all. This is tungsten carbide. I believe it's polyhedral tungsten carbide. This is a very interesting material. It's run at 71 Rockwell hardness, which is very, very hard, and that all translates to the fact that basically, you're not going to need to sharpen this knife very often at all. I have, in fact, had this Delatore, and I've carried it regularly. I've got a Lanza downstairs, and guess what? I use it for opening all of my packages and abuse it on purpose. Like, just give it a couple of shots at the cardboard just to see. I still haven't been able to dull the damn thing. This is a very impressive blade material, but it is not steel. It is fundamentally something entirely different. And that is, of course, the news. That's the big thing that Sandrin brings to the table always. And then finally, a quick note just on the price. I introduced the elephant in the room. This is a $200 pocket knife. So anyways, let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of this very interesting knife here. So on the good side, start with ergonomically speaking, it's actually quite good. This fits very well in my relatively small hands, but it locks right in there because you've got this finger choil here. You've got this little bit of thumb ramp / dip area in there. It's nicely jimped in there. This just fits very, very well, and it's also balanced very well. That's one of the things that I very much respect is they have done a really good job of balancing out this relatively lightweight blade. Well, it's lightweight because it's so thin. That's actually one of the things I want to compare real quick. Here it is against the Spyderco Delica in terms of blade thickness. What we see here is this is ridiculously thin, and I love it. Next to the Paramilitary 2. Oh, yeah. So this is going to slice, and indeed it does. But anyways, they've done a good job balancing it. Next up, this is a very lightweight knife. Let's go on ahead and drop this guy on a scale here. What we see here is we are looking at 2.32 ounces for, where is my ruler? Come here, ruler. I know you're around here someplace. Someday there will be a day where I'm not searching for my ruler in the middle of a review, but boy, that day ain't today. I don't think I'm going to find it here today. Damn, I'm good. Oh, there it is. It's on my desk. All right, back at the ranch. So here it is. We are coming in just under 3 inches of blade length here, right around 7.5 centimeter there. And so what we see here versus the sharpened blade length, by the way, is a little bit under 2.5 inches. So anyways, it is very, very lightweight, though, coming in at 2-point-some odd ounces, 2.36 was it ounces, for under 3 inch, for a little bit over 3 inches of blade, or 2.5, depending on how you want to register. So that's a beautiful thing. Next thing, this does have some of the nice details that Sandrin has been sort of known for. They've got their little Fibonacci sequence, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5 millimeter hole pattern here, which actually works as the hole for the pocket clip, which is a very nice thing. You've also got some very nice clip positioning. If we take a look at the clip here, we see it is on one of these ridges here. This ridge has a specific area that is untextured for that clip to rest on either side. Speaking of the either side bit, this is a fully ambidextrous knife. Because you have the locking mechanism, or I'm sorry, good God, the locking mechanism is actually ambidextrous. I'll just go there because my brain wants to. The locking mechanism itself is ambidextrous. This is the recoil lock. We'll talk about this a little bit later on, but you pull back on this, and you can do that just as well from either side. The thumb studs, that's the term I wanted, is also ambidextrous, so that's not a problem. And given that you can flip the clip, this is a knife that is just as good an experience for lefties as for righties, and that's a beautiful thing for about 10% of the population. Beautiful thing. It's also a relatively small knife in the pocket here. If I, close this guy up, what we see here is it's coming in pretty close to your delicate size. A little bit smaller, a little bit thicker, actually. The plastic on this is a little bit on the thicker side, but it's a very small, compact knife in the pocket, and so that's good. Next thing, this guy has a recoil lock on there, or the recoil lock. I don't know that this has been done elsewhere. It is based on a design by Snek Tan. It's SNECX. He's pretty well known in the knife world as a person who doesn't make a lot of knives, but makes a lot of designs, and so this is a lock that he has had a heavy, it's called Inspired By. I don't know exactly where that lives, but it is a thing. But basically what happens is when a shock lock loves a compression lock very, very much, you get this. Watch my disassembly video to get a sense of how it actually works. But functionally, in practice, what happens is to unlock the knife, to unlock the knife, you just take this unit here, this backspacer, and you just pull it back. And when you do that, the blade falls shut, and there's no problem there. And then to open the thing, you don't need to do anything at all. It provides actually a pretty adequate detent on there. Actually, pretty adequate is not that's not fair. It is a good detent. It is a very good detent given what you got here. So I appreciate that. And this is actually a nice lock. I've been pretty impressed with it. It's been secured to some basic testing, but still. Did some spine whacking with it. Put in a vise and just saw, how much can this take? This absolutely is a secure lock. I got no beef there. It's well positioned as well, because by the way, if you're using this guy, you'll notice that the area that you would need to move forward is actually underneath your thumb. There's not an area, there's no real touching here. So it's not like you're going to accidentally unlock it. And to do so, you would need to move backwards. And that's not generally the method that you use when you're when you're really bearing down on a knife. I think this has very nice action on both directions. The fall shut is nice. I'm actually a fan of this. I really like this lock, and I hope we see it on a lot more Sandrin knives. So that's good. And actually, that brings us to the next point, which is that this is actually pretty innovative in a couple of ways. I mean, the biggest one is this lock here, which is something new, but the tungsten carbide itself is actually pretty brand new, right? And it's nice to see it, a knife that is designed for one-hand operation, and this very much is. Then finally, on the good side, this is a very solid utilitarian design. The knife is pretty well designed to put in work, right? It's locking, which is definitely an improvement. It has a nice thin blade, which is going to make it great for slicing. It's got good materials, good ergonomics, and a very nice clip. So to me, at least, all that is the good, is that it's got this solid utilitarian design. It's doing some innovative stuff in there with the new lock. The lock is actually quite good. The clip positioning is good. They got nice details here. It's small in the pocket. It's very lightweight, and the ergos are actually quite nice. On the great side, the tungsten carbide blade material. I mean, that's the thing that Sandrin has going, right? This is one of those knives, much like the Della Torre, etc., that I don't think people would really look twice at if it weren't for that, right? If this were in VG10, no one would give a damn, right? This is a beautiful blade, though. It is absolutely awesome, because not only is it rust-proof, which is a beautiful thing for the swamp witches in your life, but it is just really, really wear-resistant. Like I said, I've been using my Lanza. I've been using the Della Torre as much as I possibly can, and it is still nowhere near dull. By the way, look at that finish. Oh, man, is that nice. But anyways, I'm a big, big fan of the Della Torre and the Lanza here, and they are very, very hard to dull. But more importantly, when you can do it, when you can dull it eventually, not only do they offer a little bit of a service to do that themselves, but actually, I sent this guy the version 1 TCK off to Ron over at the KME Sharpeners. He was very curious, hey, can you actually work with this stuff? And he was able to, on just a basic KME with the diamond edges on there, was able to do it. And so it's actually not as intimidating as you'd like, but the performance is really crazy. It's nice to know that you could sharpen it at home, but it's even nicer to know that they're willing to handle it. But anyways, to me, what's great here is this tungsten carbide blade material. I've been super impressed with it in their other knives, and certainly it's not going to be for everything. It's not going to be for everybody, but at the same time, for my daily life, it's been pretty great. So I really like this tungsten material. feel, and I think to me that's what's great here. The bad side, to start with, the bearing choice is a little strange here. Sure, it gives you a very nice drop shot action. That's nice too, but honestly, it was just a little bit weird when you've got something that's really built very utilitarian to go with the fancy bearing option rather than phosphor bronze or something like that. Next thing, the low saber grind on this guy is effective, but I can't say it's attractive, especially with this little bit right here. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and honestly, this whole little bit here doesn't make a whole lot of sense. They could have just extended the choil out a little bit further and then just had it serve as a sharpening choil. You know, finger choil into sharpening choil is certainly not unheard of. Here's an example of it. This is the Oz Machine Company Roosevelt, where the finger choil just extends all the way out and becomes the sharpening choil. I don't know that they need that. It's possible, actually, that they do need this to hit up against something, that this is sort of the stop pin, where the stop pin hits or something along those lines, but I kind of wish it wasn't, because this little area here is not super attractive. Next thing, the blade-to-handle ratio on this knife is pretty out of control. What I mean by that is that we've got, in terms of sharpened blade length, we've got about 2.5 inches of blade, but in terms of handle length, yeah, we're almost double, right? There is not a whole lot of blade packed into a relatively large handle here. If you are willing to consider the unsharpened portions too, it's a little less crazy, but yeah, that's not something that a lot of folks are going to love. Next thing, this little area right here, I'm going to zoom in a little bit and show you. This is the recoil lock, right? This is the thing that in order to disengage the lock, you're going to see here, this moves back, and then forward to lock up. When I pull this guy back, I need to do this. I need to be taking this little area right here and then moving it in that direction. The problem is they've put a little corner right where you want to be grabbing. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Why you would have a sharp corner there doesn't work. I would much prefer that they'd done like a little bit of a ramp or something like that. Use the jimping there. But instead, this is just not super pleasant to work with, right? Every time you use it, you're just grabbing your thumb into a 90-degree angle. That's not amazing. Yeah, sure, it gives some traction, but dude, no. I think there's a much better way to do that. Next thing, and actually that raises exactly the issue here. What we see here is this thumb stud is actually very close to the scale and not all that prominent relative to it. And so there is a tendency to accidentally slip off of that because your thumb is already pretty high. There's not much thumb stud sticking up here. So they could consider maybe either drilling or, milling out a little bit more of the scale material here to give you a little bit more of a space to get into, or maybe making the thumb studs just a little bit higher. It's not terrible, but it is definitely something I'm not a big fan of. And it's something they could pretty easily release in their next version here. Next thing, this is getting a little bit more subjective, but I also feel like this is a very widely held opinion. The G10 here, this is actually G10. This is a red G10 material. This is not injection molded plastic. This is actually G10, which at some level, that's a fair amount of milling time, right? But at another level, boy, does this look like injection molded plastic. This just doesn't look very high end. This doesn't look like a $200 knife. And especially, I could see them doing the lightning pockets on the inside there, and it looking a lot more so, but this red combined with that just feels like, ooh. Boy, and in fact, the whole thing, that brings us to our next point, which is that this feels like a massive step down relative to the Della Torre, relative to the Lanza, relative to even the TCK, that is. This knife feels like, one of these things is not like the other. Which one doesn't belong, right? Sandrin has done something entirely different here. Aesthetically speaking, it doesn't particularly work out well. I mean, it comes down to one of those you versus the guy she told you not to worry about moments, right? They are entirely different, and that ends up feeling a little bit not so great, especially given the price point here. And that brings me to the final point on the bad side, which is that $200 feels very high given the construction of this knife. The performance is there, and that's one of the paradoxes of this knife, is that it is, functionally speaking, quite good. Functionally, this could be a $200 knife, but it's going to be a very hard sell, though, I think, at $200. I'll talk a bit more about why later, but that, to me, is the bad thing. Is like, this knife could be very interesting functionally, but that price ends up feeling a little high, and I don't know that it needed to. So, anyways, that, to me, is the bad, is that $200 feels very high for the construction of the knife. It feels like a big step down relative to some of Sandrin's past work that's been very impressive. The G10 here looks kind of cheapy, or is made to look like injection molded plastic. The sharp heel on the recoil lock needs to be rounded off there. The blade heel bump isn't great. The low saber grind is effective, but maybe not that attractive. And the bearings are a little bit strange here. On the ugly front, to me, this blade finish is not great. I'm going to try and just kind of give you a bunch of perspectives here, but what you're going to see is, it's not common, or it's not uncommon to have like little micro lines in a blade finish. This is the Spyderco Paramilitary 2. This is a finish with uniform lines going downwards. Here is a nice hand-rubbed satin on the Oz Machine Company Roosevelt. We see here, yeah, you have those grooves coming through here. That's not what this is, though. This is completely chaotic. Depending on the angle you're looking at, you're going to see the lines in about 50 different directions here. And the end result, I gotta say, doesn't do it for me at all. When I first saw a picture of this knife on Instagram, I thought, oh, cool, they're showing off a prototype. Oh, the blade's kind of messed up, but I bet the real one's gonna look great. And then they kept showing it, and they kept showing it. It was like, oh, God, they're shipping that. And so on their website, they kind of acknowledge this. They say, new for the Torino is the blade's raw carbide finish. Its striking appearance is achieved by grinding the PTC, polyhedral tungsten carbide, with fine diamonds. In practice, that's probably accurate, but it looks more like leave it on the shop floor for a few months, right? This looks just very, very beat up. And I understand 100%. And, when I posted this on Instagram, the comments were, shall we say, severe about the blade finish. And, the Sandrin folks were in there saying, well, no, this is a way to cut costs. And the thing is, and I can see it. And to be fair, one advantage of this is there is nothing you could do while sharpening this or using it that's going to mess up the finish any more than it starts. But no, it ends up looking unfinished in a very, frankly, in the most charitable sense of the world. This looks like, baby's first pocket knife making, right? And especially, it's a remarkable kind of step backwards from a company that has been dropping these blade finishes that are just like, damn. So seeing Sandrin, of all people, come out with this finish was just like, really? Are you okay? And honestly, I feel like this knife with a blade finish that was even attempting to look reasonable would be much nicer feeling, even if it cost a little bit more money. So to me, at least, what's ugly here is this blade finish, which just comes up looking cheap and, frankly, not like a finish at all. This is a halfway, not a blade finish. So anyways, to me, at least, that's what's ugly here is the blade halfway. Final conclusions. This one was tough to come to a conclusion on. It's got nice ergos. It's got nice weight, nice accents, a good clip, good carryability, and frankly, a nice new lock. It's got some innovations. It's got a utilitarian design and blade material that I feel like is pretty amazing, right? Yet it's running on bearings rather than phosphor bronze for some weird reason here. Whatever, not a big deal though. It's got a weird blade to handle ratio. The sharp heel here needs to be knocked down. Thumb stud access could be a little bit better. The G10 on this just looks cheap, and honestly, so does the overall construction. And then they've got this blade finish that isn't finished at all, and that's just not great. And all of that makes for something that I think is a little paradoxical. If you listen to the Knife Nuts podcast, episode 50, they covered this in rather critical detail. And honestly, I feel like they pretty handily nailed the community response to it. There have definitely been some people who like it, but by and large, the things they were saying, I've been hearing a lot elsewhere too. Right, because this does look very cheap. It does look kind of bad in that way. And they even went so far as to say Nick Shabazz is and I'm paraphrasing, but Nick Shabazz is going to tell you this is good. Do not let the reviewers tell you this knife is good. It isn't. Use your own eyes. And you know what? From a perspective, they've got a solid point there. Make no mistake, and this is the part they're afraid of. It is a good, functional tool. It's not perfect. There are tweaks to be made in blade shape and contouring, and there are details here, but I could hand this to somebody doing actual work with an actual knife, and it would serve them very well. But the biggest problem that this knife has, I think they touched on very effectively. This guy looks like it belongs in a plastic bowl in a hardware store. I mean, I'll put it up against something else. This is the Milwaukee Fastback. This is a utility knife holder, but at the same time, the aesthetics there are pretty undeniably similar. This is $8. This is $8 online or something like that. This is $200. And I don't get that, really. The thing is, the messaging here is that we're cutting corners on finishing to make the knife affordable. That's well and good. In fact, that's a great idea. That's a nice thing that makers can do to make things more, frankly, accessible. But the problem is, if you're cutting corners to make the knife affordable, the knife has to end up as affordable. If this were $80, if this were $100, I would be singing from the rooftops. Oh my God, look at this. Well, the blade finish, but at the same time, $80 for tungsten carbide. Okay, but $200 is well into the mid-range here. That is a price point at which you can damn near have it all. With lots of options, combining great steels. And mind you, they're not the tungsten, but at the same time, they're good with great finishing and even with innovation, with nice locks, that kind of thing. Selling this guy at that price doesn't particularly work because relative to the competition, this ends up looking and in some ways feeling exceptionally cheap, right? And the response to selling these looks at that price has been strong, very, very strong, and frankly, not that surprising to me. I totally get their desire to get this into people's pocket at at a lower price point, right? But I would argue that if this is what you have to do to hit $200, I'm not sure they can hit $200, or at the very least, this needs to be the low end of the product. But it feels like at the moment, somebody probably could have stopped them at some point and said, hold up, guys, wait, we're shipping it like that? Because this feels like a prototype, not like the final product. And especially when Sandrin made a name for themselves in designs that are a little fancier, that are very classy, that are beautifully finished. When they've done that for all of their history and then they drop this, it kind of comes across a little bit as like, guys, are you okay? What happened here? Because right now, the frustrating thing is that their latest and greatest knife, and I do, by the way, believe that functionally speaking, this is probably their greatest knife yet, and it has a bunch of innovations, but it's only available in this discount hardware store aesthetic, and I think that disappointed a lot of folks. And so at the end of the day, this, like many things in the EDC world, comes down to form and function. If form is really important to you, then I suspect for many people, although some folks like it, this is probably going to be a pass. And these are the folks saying LOL no and moving on, and that's not unreasonable. There are lots of knives available, $200 that are absolutely beautiful. And frankly, for $300, you can get a knife that's absolutely beautiful from Sandrin, right? And there are a lot of knives that look like this one that are available very inexpensively. If you're willing to look past form, though, this is very different. It's got a great blade, good construction, solid ergos. It's a knife that could very much serve you well. And so if you're contemplating it and you don't mind the aesthetic, you don't mind the price, go for it. It will work great. But my final conclusion here has been difficult, right? Because at some point, I'm torn. Like if I look at it in terms of function, in terms of use, it's pretty damn solid. A little couple of tweaks, but oh, wow, this is pretty decent. And then I open my eyes and it's just like, And so my final conclusion is, okay, good proof of concept. Now release a version at a price point where you can do your great work, right? I would totally be interested in that. This knife, done with the exact same flair and style as the Della Torre, as the Lanza, as some of their other stuff, that would make for something really compelling, really recommendable. This would be an easy gem at $250, done just a little bit nicer. And even if the final price ends up at the full $300 of this guy, you know what? That's okay. It could work just fine, because these innovations and this design done right could absolutely be worth paying a little bit more for. But at the moment, it's a solid tool, but I think the aesthetics of this model are going to end up being very much a Torino for a lot of folks in the community, and at some level, that's very much a shame. So anyways, there you go. Hope this has been interesting to you. Sandrin, I can't wait for the next model. But for the moment, good job, but I can't wait for that next version. Have a good one. Bye now.